Go. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's virtual workshop. I'm Rebecca, I'm Community Engagement Manager here at Dial Global, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the amazing Neil Shorthouse. Neil is founder and chief executive of Shorthouse Hospitality International, which is an award-winning hospitality and project management consultancy with operations throughout Europe, Asia, South Pacific and the Middle East. Neil founded this business after many years of experience within the global HR sector, including working with well-known brands such as Disney Cruise Line and Emirates. So I will let Neil introduce himself in a little bit more detail, but just before I hand over, I just wanted to remind you to put your questions in the chat, or I know I have got a few via email because you'll be watching on demand, but also there's a Q&A section as well, so we'll make sure these all get answered. So very warm welcome to you, Neil, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. As Rebecca said, my background is within hospitality. So today is also Thanksgiving in the US. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Thanksgiving, working within the cruise industry, in essence, providing Thanksgiving in some ways to 40 different nationalities and looking at all their various cultures. And then also touching a little bit on women in hospitality and the transition that's occurred within the Maldives over the last 12 years. So just a little bit more about my background and how my career sort of, I suppose, progressed over the last almost 30 years within hospitality, travel and tourism. So, you know, here's just a very sort of brief overview, but just to give you a little bit more about my background. So I originally studied for hospitality management, graduated from university, and was looking to work for big hotel companies based within the UK. At that time, they said that you had to go through food and beverage to be a general manager. Now, I had peeled my potatoes and peeled my carrots many times, and it wasn't necessarily the route that I wanted to take. So at university, I did a work placement at Walt Disney World in Florida, and they were launching a cruise line. And they asked me, would I want to set up a cruise line? So I was like, yeah, why not? And that's, you know, as I say, the rest is history. And that's sort of how I fell within, you know, into the cruise sector as well. Within, you know, the cruise division, if you will, you have various departments. And one area that I really enjoyed working with was within people management, HR. So that's sort of how I transitioned through into the human resources field, if you will. And if we fast forward sort of through to where we are now, the Maldives is very passionate for me in the sense that when I got to the end of my cruise career, I wanted to see if I could do HR talent development on land as well as at sea. So as you do, instead of coming back to London, I ended up working in the Maldives. Now, for those of you that I do know, you will know that the Maldives is very close to my heart, and it's a destination and country that I've worked in and supported now for almost 13 years. And there's been a lot of transition during that time within the country itself and within its culture. The picture here, whenever I do a session, I always take a selfie at the end of the session for something fun. So here in this room, we had over 300 owners, operators, HR professionals within the Maldives at a HR conference. And I just finished presenting. So I went to take a selfie, and then the photographer came and took a picture of me taking the picture of the selfie with everyone in it. But in some ways, it sums up everything that I do. Is there's a serious element to it, but we also have a lot of fun wherever we're working with individuals or with teams. So myself as an individual, as you can see here, I was recently appointed a fellow of the Global Peace Institute, which is something I'm very passionate about. We work with generations, and we do a lot of work with the youth. And what is interesting with Global Peace Institute, whenever we have any sessions or any gatherings, the youth of today know full well what is wrong and what is right. And they've got so much passion and drive in what they believe in. And, you know, there are those of us within the industries that we sort of talk to them, whether, you know, they're from different cultures, different backgrounds. And you'll see when I start talking about, you know, working at sea like United Nations, the youth and ambassadors within the Global Peace Institute come from a wide range, breadth, depth, knowledge, cultures, backgrounds, and sometimes they're from countries that are really struggling, yet their passion and drive and commitment is astounding. So in some ways, you know, the next generation are definitely there and ready to sort of take us through. In 2016, I was also appointed a fellow of the Institute of Hospitality, which is one of the industry leading associations. It's a global institute, a global association, and our biggest sort of membership is within the UK, but it's also global as well. We have branches within the UK, and we have one of our largest branches outside of the UK is actually in Sri Lanka. I do a lot of work with local academy trusts and also visiting lecturers and colleges. Just happen to be in the Maldives as well, which is quite nice, and also do some work with some local colleges here. So it's a very broad brush, if you will, in the sense of having worked with many different cultures, many different backgrounds, many different nationalities. And no matter what you do as an individual, I think if you have the opportunity to work overseas, to work with a different culture, to work with a different background, and to work with different individuals, it really gives you a broader experience and a broader depth of knowledge when it comes to dealing with individuals. And, you know, for me, it's all about working with, you know, the person. It doesn't matter where they're from, who they are, what their background is. You know, everyone is a human, everyone is unique, and everyone is individual. And, you know, so you can see from this picture, it's Maldives, it's mainly a Muslim country, and yet you have got so many different groups and diverse individuals there as well. So as I mentioned earlier, it's Thanksgiving today in the US. So anyone celebrating, I hope you're having a great Thanksgiving Day. And also, what am I thankful for this year? I'm thankful for all of my family and all of my friends and everyone that is there supporting each other. It's a tough year. And personally, I think next year is going to be as critical as this year. So when we talk about Thanksgiving and when we talk about this United Nations at Sea, which I'll expand on in a moment, we need to be able to look out for each other next year. This year is about survival. This year is about resilience. This year is about getting to the end of it. And it's December next week, so, you know, we're almost there. But when you're working with your teams, next year is going to be far more about making sure that you are there for them, making sure that you're listening, you're taking note, you're taking time to be with them. It's not going to, it is going to be about, you know, still keeping going and making sure things are working. But the human element is, you know, in some ways, some people, you know, their whole lives and everything have been completely destroyed. And so for next year, it's about having that empathy and that genuine understanding about how do we support each other, you know, moving forward. So, you know, part of my career, I spent working at sea as a senior officer on board ships as a HR officer. So in essence, was part of the deck department. So on a ship, you have deck engine and hotel, and reported directly into the captain. Now, you know, the story here is that we were working for an American cruise line, very luxurious cruise line, and it was Thanksgiving. So the predominant makeup of our guests were American. So, you know, there was, you know, everything you imagine. We had lots of turkey, lots of food. So, you know, from the guest perspective, they're having a great time. They're celebrating with family or friends, and they're being looked after, and they're receiving, you know, exquisite service, a service that just happens. And, you know, the wine glass is filled up, the food is there. But when you step back from that, and in the role that I had on board the ship, I've also got a workforce of up to 300 crew members representing 40 different nationalities. So one thing that, you know, when you're working in those environments, you have to realize that, you know, every day potentially could be an Independence Day. It could be a national day. It could be something relevant to that culture. It could be Songkran for Thailand. It could be Diwali in India. So you have all of these different events and you have all of these different nationalities. Hence, you know, I call it United Nations at Sea. It's one area that you have all these nationalities, all these cultures, all living and working under one roof, and it's peaceful. You know, there's a few hiccups there and here and there, but for the most part, it works. You know, you've got this blend of cultures, you know, multinational. But what you have to do here is, you know, you make sure that you represent the different cultures and the different traditions. And as a crew member who is on board, you potentially have the opportunity to be immersed in different cultures and learn about different cultures, different traditions. You know, it could be, you know, learning about different foods and how they, you know, they celebrate, and you learn about, you know, history and stories. So it's much more than, yes, you know, in the US, it's Thanksgiving, it's a very big day. But when you're working in an environment like the cruise industry or on board a ship, you very much have to ensure that everybody is represented, everybody, you know, has their moment to shine, if you will. So, you know, when you're living and working on board the ship, and, you know, you're responsible, and one captain used to call me Father Goose, like Mother Hen, because in essence, I was responsible for even making sure that the captain and everyone was looked after. So whether it was, you know, celebrating birthdays, whether it was celebrating special events, and each month or whenever there was a special event or activity, what really shone through was that the crew members from that country, so if they were from Thailand, you had, you know, Thais or Indians or Mauritians or any different nationality, they would be so thankful for what they were being able to share with their fellow crew members and have the opportunity to talk about their cultures, have the opportunity to share traditional foods. You know, working at sea was one of the best places where you would have, you know, chefs who worked within the galley. So, you know, for those, same as the kitchen, but on a ship, it's called a galley. And it would be the most amazing curries because you had Indian chef. And then potentially you would have, you know, security officers from Nepal. So you would have Nepalese food. You would potentially have, you know, different various nationalities. So, you know, they would be really excited to share with you about their different cultures and their different food. So in that type of environment, even though it's, you know, many different nationalities, you really get the opportunity to celebrate, but also celebrate with different nationalities and get to learn and understand different cultures and different beliefs. And, you know, I've had crew members come and they've signed on and it's their first time at sea, and it's literally their first foray into working, you know, outside of their home country. And, you know, they potentially arrive with a very, I suppose, in some ways, a very narrow mindset in regards to, you know, how things happen and how things, you know, take place. But by the time they finish their contracts, they have got friends and made friendships with different nationalities, different cultures, different beliefs. And there's no stigma, there's no nothing, because in that environment, you work together as one. It doesn't matter, you know, your background, it doesn't matter, you know, your culture or your belief, everyone, you know, you're part of one. And it's really nice because, you know, even myself, I'm currently in the UK, although the virtual screen behind me was taken 2 years ago at a resort in the Maldives that I was doing some work in. And, you know, I do have, you know, some colleagues and friends here in the UK, but when I look at my address book for Christmas, 90% of my cards, and I do still send cards because I still do, you know, like to write them and put little notes in, 90% goes overseas. So it just shows you that, you know, a few years on from, you know, living and working in this type of environment, I still got a group of friends that, you know, are global. So it really represents, you know, yes, it's potentially one day, one, you know, date in the calendar for the, you know, United States or Americans to celebrate Thanksgiving. But when I put it into the context of Thanksgiving in general, when you work within an environment like a cruise ship, you're potentially working with up to, I mean, on the larger cruise ships, you could have up to 50 or 60 different nationalities. And, you know, what a better way to learn about different cultures and different beliefs as well. So thanks for being, sorry, Rebecca.
Mind if I just interject that we've got quite a few questions on that topic actually at the moment.
Absolutely.
So Michelle's just asked something around the more overall area of HR in terms of because HR is difficult at the best of times, but when you're on a ship that's just, you can't get away sort of thing. Michelle's asked, what's the most difficult issue you've had to deal with regarding diversity as a HR professional on a cruise ship, as opposed to not at sea, if that makes sense?
I suppose, I mean, unfortunately, you're right. When you're working in this type of environment, there is no ability in essence to get away from a situation. So you live and work in this environment. So normally at home, if you had an issue, everyone goes home, whereas here everyone stays within that environment. So, you know, on one ship we actually had an allegation of harassment, sexual harassment between a female and a male. Two different nationalities, two different cultures and beliefs. And, you know, you have to, unfortunately, you still have individuals with that mindset that are very much, you look at a person and you go, yes, it was, you know, unfortunately, we have those preconceptions, whether we like it or not. You already make that type of assumption. And we had to be very careful in how we approached it, because culturally, in one of the cultures, something like this was a huge taboo subject, and you know, it wouldn't necessarily have been discussed. So you really sort of have to tread very carefully, as you would anyway, but it's making sure that you're always offering that extra support along the way if that individual crew member needs it. So for example, with the female, they would always be allowed to have a colleague or a friend, and we would, you know, female, someone else with them. So they feel that that they're respected at the same time as giving everyone, you know, the fair opportunity, if you will. And in HR, the challenge also is that you're living in the same environment. You see them every single day, you know. So as the HR, I would know exactly, or that crew member's doing this, that, and you have to be able to have that balance of, this is the office environment, and the moment you leave the office and you're in the crew area or guest area, what sort of happens in that office has to stay within that office. So you're also dealing with potentially, if crew members come into your office or the staff captain's office, who staff captain is responsible for sort of security, is that rumours will already be going around the ship, oh, so-and-so's gone in to see the staff captain. What? So it's very much about having that trust at the same time, and making sure that you, within anyone within HR, it's making sure that your due diligence is done, you've done your investigation thoroughly, and everybody is given the opportunity to have that fair discussion. And no matter what the end result is, and ultimately within this environment, you have got certain offences which are an automatic dismissal, meaning that regardless, that individual has to leave the ship. And in some countries with their contracts, we would sort of say the contract has been mutually agreed to be ended, because in certain cultures, if you put on there, this person's being dismissed for harassment or something like that, then they can actually be blacklisted and no longer work again. And it may have just been that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So it's definitely having that sort of fair balance between the two. And you really have got to nip things in the bud when they happen, because you're in a close, confined environment. And the worst thing in some ways, or not the worst thing, but one of the challenges is, imagine you're doing a transatlantic, which means you have 7 days at sea, and something happens on day 2. You know, it could mean that a crew member is under security escort for the next 5 days, because you cannot, you know, disembark them in the next port, which is what you would normally do. So it's very much having a balancing act to make sure that everything is fair, it's transparent, and you're given the opportunity and the support at the same time where you need it as well.
Thanks, Neil. I think that leads quite nicely onto the next one. So we've had someone email in a number of questions around the nationality aspect of the HR. So you say obviously managing around 40 different nationalities. I know it must be extremely difficult to do that in general, but in terms of the question is, how do you manage different nationalities and religions? Do you have any advice on the best way of ensuring that people's cultural holidays and awareness days are recognised without certain groups feeling overlooked?
So in some ways it's complex, but it's also a little bit easier in the sense that you have a crew welfare committee, and you have a representative from each department present at that meeting, and it's always, as HR, it's always run by the crew, and you are there to support them. And ideally, what you would do is you would get a list of all your nationalities, and you go through that list and say, right, what's a cultural day? What's a special day? What needs to be recognised? And you therefore make sure that each nationality is given their opportunity to do an event, to cook food, or to have a special celebration. Depending on your, I suppose, the predominant makeup of your crew, that also determines, everyone has the opportunity to share their cultures and their religious beliefs. Some may be slightly bigger than others just due to that, sort of nationality breakdown that you have. But as a crew member, it's great because you could walk in one day and it's Diwali, so you have Indian food. It could be, a national day for Nepal, so you have Nepalese food. So you really do get to experience so many different foods and cultures. And what is really nice is that the crew members themselves are really excited to share this with you, because the industry, and as we know, unfortunately, everything is is devastated right now, and we're eagerly waiting for hospitality, travel and tourism to resurge and bounce back. And there are certain nationalities that work on ships that potentially come from a very small group of individuals, and it may be 4 or 5 crew members. But boy, do they're so passionate that they come to you and say, oh, we want to do this, we want to do that. And they run with it. And you walk into the crew mess and it's decorated, and they're in national, I don't know where they find the costumes, but they're in national costume. And, you really do feel part of it. And it's making sure that everyone feels included, and you give them that opportunity. There are some crew members that may not wish to, and that's absolutely fine. It's respecting what they want to do. But 9 times out of 10, you just let them run with it, because because they're so passionate about it, that you'll walk into the mess and you'll be transported, because they would have, and they will go ashore and buy stuff if they can, to really showcase and share it with everyone, because they're very proud of their culture and their background. And it also becomes a conversation starter as well, to sort of understand about different cultures and beliefs as well.
That's a really interesting point, actually, on the giving them the opportunity to express their culture and themselves, because I don't think that's often sometimes the case within some organisations. Because I know recently we've done our Mackenzie Dellis Packer review. I'm sure Layla's already told you about that. It's the review of the 10 facets of diversity within UK workplaces, and one of the lowest facets that came up from the responses was nationality. So from the results, it was sort of found out that only 1 in 5 of the organisations surveyed don't actually even collect data on nationality, and only 35% actually mention nationality within their leadership team diversity strategy. So I think it seems like such a difference between that and the cruise ship, where people are just so open and they wanting to.
And in some ways, we already have that data to hand, because we have to, obviously, you're arriving into different countries, so you have to present a manifest of everyone that's on board, and that is all the passport details. So you know, as a HR sort of person on board, you have access to all of this. So you literally at the click of a button know your nationalities and everything from that. So it's that tool is there anyway, and 9 times out of 10 they will come to you anyway and say, oh, it's such and such a day. Are we doing anything? And if you're not, then you hand it over to them and they run with it.
Yeah. Sounds good. And I think that's another similar question on that topic. So Francis has just said, noticed that HR seems to be moving towards a more human-centric style of leadership. He's asking, do you think this is just an amplification of a message that was already present, or do you think this is truly the case and we are moving towards a more human-centric? It sounds like the hospitality and cruise industry are, but I don't know about sort of other companies.
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of it is down to the individual. So, you know, there are, you know, HR practitioners out there that I would say are very, what I call theory based, and very, you know, they do things by a book because that's how they've sort of been taught, and that's, you know, if there's an issue, they always refer back to a book or something. The cruise industry and hospitality, it's all about, you know, working with people and being there to support them. Within the cruise industry and potentially resorts in the Maldives or destinations that you live and work within that same environment. So at the end of the day, you don't get on a train or a bus or drive home. You walk to your accommodation. And when you are in that environment, and when you're sort of at the head of the HR department, you're much more, because I'm also welfare, I'm also health, I'm also, you know, if unfortunately, you know, someone loses someone within the family, we're inevitably the first person that they talk to since hearing about that bereavement or that loss. Or if, you know, if there has been a natural disaster like a typhoon or something. So you're automatically given a very broad range and topic of points of discussion, I suppose, that you can't sort of just go in and say, oh, you know, it's 5 o'clock, I'm going home, it's got nothing to do with me. The cruise industry and certain resorts, because you've got people there 24/7, you're much more than just the department that pays them their money or you know, is having, you know, discussions with them. So a lot of it, I think, is, and I think what we will find with what's happened with COVID and the pandemic is next year, as and when companies start to recover, those within HR talent development or even management or leadership, they're going to have to diversify in the sense that, okay, you know, Rebecca's going home, but unfortunately it was a really tough year. So I think there's going to be, it's going to force the issue. And those companies that embrace it and those companies that actually have the ability to empathize and understand from a broader perspective, I think will come out much, much stronger versus those that still have that very much, oh, it's 5 o'clock, you go home. Just very quickly, within the educational trust that I sit on the board or the chair of the trustees, we're looking at that now with our teachers, in the sense that, you know, we need to make sure that they're looked after. We need to make sure that they have what we call a duvet day, to have that ability to take some time out to focus and to drive, you know, to look after themselves. So I think it's going to morph into something very different next year. And I think a lot of this static viewpoint will have to change, because individuals will look for that much bigger support versus, you know, you just go home and you come into work type of thing. I think it will overlap more than what it has done.
Brilliant, thank you. That's another question that was actually sent in anonymously. This one around COVID and the cruise industry, because obviously it's one of the hardest hit industries. And so, do you think that? Sorry, the question is, what do you expect their recovery to look like, and how long do you think it will take, and any sort of changes that might need to be put in place to sort of bring that recovery up to speed?
So I suppose the good news is that there are already companies out there and organizations out there that have developed and are developing very quick, rapid tests. What will happen is that guests going on board a ship will have to have a test before they get to the terminal, when they get to the terminal, and as and when they get on board the ship. A lot of cruise ships are already reducing capacity. They're not going to sail at 100% full. They're going to potentially sail at maybe 75, 80% full. So you have much more space between individuals. From a recovery perspective, when you look at industry statistics, bookings are already up 150% year on year. So people are eager to travel, and you've got, I think there's, personally think there's three different groups. There's a group like me that will travel tomorrow. There's the group that want to travel, but they're going to wait and see what happens and wait for a vaccine and things of that nature. And then you've potentially got those that will not travel for a long time yet, or will stop traveling altogether as well. So, and the cruise industry, it unfortunately is always in the news, in the sense when something negative happens, it makes headlines. The one thing about the cruise industry that may not be known is it's one of the only self-reporting industries, meaning that if someone is ill or someone is sick, it has to be reported by law to the next port of call to which they are visiting. Now, if you take the hotel industry, if someone is ill in a hotel, it's not reported. No one really has to report it, unless unfortunately it's a death or it's a food poisoning or something of that nature. That's when you hear about it. Because the cruise industry self-reports on everything from crew to the guests, you definitely see a lot more prevalent in the news, because it's a smaller and confined environment. It's basically, it's there. You can't get away from it. The cruise industry itself, from a protocol and outbreak standpoint, has actually always made sure that they're ahead of the game. I think, unfortunately, because COVID is so unknown and everyone is still learning about it, it becomes a lot more of a challenge to control it, because no one really knows how to control it. No one really knows what needs to be done and what needs to happen to make sure that everyone is safe. So the cruise industry, there are, on average at the moment, there's about 35 ships that are actually sailing week on, week out, with guests on board that are having very stringent guidelines in place. And they're doing coastal cruises, meaning they're just sailing within that country. So you've got some going around France, you've got some in Italy, some in Greece, some in the South Pacific. But it's more about making sure that everyone is safe and secure. So the industry will bounce back. It will, we know that the CDC, the Centre for Disease Control, have lifted the no sail ban, but they put very tough restrictions in place for ships to sail. A lot of cruise lines are announcing sailings from about March, April next year. And I think what you'll see is a lot of it home porting. So it'll be cruises around the UK for the moment. And then 6 to 12 months, you'll see more growing. The challenge is as well within the cruise industry is that most ships visit different countries. So in essence, every single country has got to make sure that they are safe as a country, but then they will also be safe to allow cruises to return as well. So it's a really tough one, because there's a lot of us that just would love things to sort of happen and come back. But then unfortunately you've got, with everything that's going on, potentially we're looking at maybe 12 to 18 months. We didn't think it would be that long. I mean, by the time some of these ships come back into service, they would have been out of operation for a year already.
Wow. Mate, it's so interesting, because I never, obviously, if I hadn't have hosted this, I wouldn't have known anything really about in detail to do with the cruise industry, and it's so great to hear about all of it. It's sort of making me want to head off onto a cruise right now, actually, in terms of trying the different foods and everything.
Exactly. In some ways, if theoretically you have crew and guests on a ship, so for example, a lot of cruises were finishing their world cruise when everything was coming to an end. And in the UK press, you were seeing articles in about March, April, where headline news: stranded ship returns back to port after. They weren't stranded. You know, one well-known famous cruise line came into Singapore and gave the options to its guests to fly home or to stay on the ship and sail all the way back to the UK with no ports of call. Okay. Majority of the guests opted to stay on board, and they had one heck of a party sailing back to the because they were in their own bubble. They were safe because no one was getting on and off. And so for the last 6 weeks, this ship sailed as a party ship all the way coming through the Suez Canal all the way back, but nobody got off the ship and nobody got on the ship. So what the press didn't tell you is that the guests were given the option: do you want to fly home or do you want to stay on board? And because it was a safe, secure environment, you know, in essence, it was one of the safest places to be.
Great, thank you very much. I think the one last question, I know you've got another slide, I'm conscious of time. So just going back slightly, this one is quite a nice one to round off the topic of the cruise ship. So what HR and D&I lessons have you learned that can be applied to all walks of life in HR from your time at sea?
I think if you're gonna work in an environment like the cruise industry, you have the ability to work with many different cultures, many different beliefs, everyone from many different walks of life. And you know, I think it's something that I sort of touched on, I think, in the beginning, is that everyone is unique, everyone is individual, and we're all human beings. And it doesn't matter your background, your culture, your belief. You know, you get to have that ability to respect everyone for who they are. And what is also great, and why I refer to it as the United Nations at Sea, is that you do have all these different nationalities living and working together in harmony. But as an individual, you could either put blinkers on and just focus on the job at hand, or you step back and you look that in front of you, you have got all these different people that you can learn about, different cultures. You can learn about a different belief or how they do things in different countries. And it really gives you that opportunity to come away actually with a much deeper understanding and wealth of knowledge, because you take that time to get to know. And for some of these cultures, by you as a Westerner, as a white person, for you to take time to sit with them and to talk to them and learn about their families, and that for them is huge. That means that you've taken time. But as an individual, and that's why I said my Christmas card list is 90% overseas. But you have that ability to absorb a lot, but you also have the ability to understand and respect that everyone's different. Everyone's makeup is very different, but you get to learn and understand and respect them as individuals. Yeah. And sometimes when things do go wrong, you also need to understand that culturally for them, that actually is the norm. So it really does give you that opportunity to say, well, okay, we don't do that in this country. However, in that country, that is norm. That is culturally okay. So I suppose you're prejudiced in one sense. I know what you mean. You have the ability to sort of put that to one side. And you, by taking that little bit of time to understand what someone's going through, what's happening, what's taking place, gives you that opportunity to correlate and sort of put things into perspective, versus very typically over in the UK, and so everyone jumps straight in, and the preconceptions are there, whereas working at sea, you really sort of have that time to step back and understand what is happening within that culture as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, because you're there, you're immersed in it, and I think that makes a real difference, because you can train people on an unconscious bias and things like that, but I think you need to be in the around people, around different nationalities, different ethnicities, to actually learn and grow in that way. And I think the cruise ship's shown that that's really good sort of area to do that in. Campbell's actually written a comment in here saying, when I worked in San Diego, one of my senior HR guys had 15 pictures in his office, 15 consecutive years of him and his wife and daughter on the Disney cruise ship in Fort Lauderdale, setting sail. Sounds
Yeah, no,
amazing.
I mean, yeah, it was such a great opportunity to launch the Disney Magic and the Disney Wonder, and you know, to this day, there's people there that you make friends in the sense that I could phone some of them now and pick up a conversation, you know, and I've not spoken to them in 20 years. But yeah, it was a unique experience because it allowed me to live and work in Florida, live and work in Venice, Italy at the shipyard, and, you know, and then bring both of the ships out for the company as well.
Oh, amazing. Thanks, Neil. I'll let you move on to the next one because I know we've only got 15 minutes now.
I know. Unfortunately, this tends to happen, but it's all good. I like
no,
it.
We can definitely stay on and chat.
It's definitely nice to be able to share sort of knowledge and experience as well. So, you know, as I sort of highlighted at the top of the hour sort of thing, is that one of my huge passions is that I have lived and worked and supported the Maldives now since 2008. So we're coming into my 13th year now in January. And the reason I wanted to touch on this is that I know there's been some certain, it's the International Day of Violence Against Women. And that was, I think, a couple of days ago. And what I wanted to focus on was a positive, in the sense that 12 years ago, when I first came to the Maldives, this picture in front of you would have not even been imaginable. And just to give you some perspective here. So if we sort of go sort of from the left of the screen where the GM Forum sign is, the lady here is a resort manager at one of the resorts in the Maldives. The lady to her sort of left outright in the red dress is also a resort manager. And both of these resorts are ultra luxury resorts. The person in the middle is myself, and the lady on the end is a chef. And all of these women are Maldivian. And in 2008, this picture would not have been imaginable. And culturally, there's still very much not a prejudice, but women working within the Maldives or within certain cultures is still frowned upon. And what you would find in the Maldives is that your housekeeping department would all be men. There would hardly be any women. You wouldn't necessarily have, you know, women on the front desk wearing, you know, the headscarf because it was frowned upon. And culturally and historically, a lot of the families wouldn't want their daughters or wives to go and work at a resort. And in essence, we would, if you live next to a local island, you would provide transport to bring the ladies to work in the morning, and you would take them home at night. They wouldn't stay and live and work in the same environment. Under Maldivian law, if you do have any females working within a resort, they must have their own separate accommodation. They cannot mix with the men. So it's very, you know, strict in the sense that, you know, even if they're in a relationship, if they're married, they can. And theoretically in HR, you have to see a marriage certificate to verify that they can actually be in the same accommodation. But, you know, if we come to where we are now, 12 years down the line, all of these women in this picture have been pioneers in their own right. Pioneers in the sense that as females, they can be given the responsibility of leading resorts in the Maldives. Miriam at the far end, she's the president of the Chefs Guild in the Maldives, and she's a woman and she's a chef. And culturally, you wouldn't see many Maldivians in the kitchen because they would determine it as dirty work. Whereas we know that chefs actually can be in a very, very creative environment. So it's very much about empowering them and having that ability to shine. But when you work within certain cultures, you also need to be very mindful of the fact that historically things would not have been allowed to happen. And it's all about breaking the barriers down. Now, I'm known for saying that whenever I'm speaking at any events in the Maldives, that I will always challenge the executive committees. Now, these are like your senior leadership teams, that if they do not have any Maldivians within that ExCom, then they need to look at themselves, because ultimately, as an expatriate living and working in the Maldives, you are a guest. You know, we have the privilege to live and work there. You know, we have a nice resort that we work in, we're looked after, it's really nice. But in some ways, it has changed a lot since 2008. And you are seeing Maldivians who are now general managers, who are responsible for resorts. And you're seeing a lot more Maldivians sort of sitting on that executive committee and making those responsibilities. But when we look at hospitality in general, you know, if you look at the Maldives, for example, people would look at that and say, well, what, you know, why are there no women? Why are all the housekeepers men? You know, why don't we see any women? Because normally, traditionally, housekeeping, you would feel that, you know, the ladies would do it. Whereas culturally here, the women were very much that they weren't able to sort of work within that environment. So it's been an interesting journey. There are still prejudice against women doing certain jobs. We work with, you know, these ladies here, and also with the colleges in the Maldives, in educating the families of students, educating them to understand that hospitality is an amazing industry, and that there are mechanisms in place to make sure that everyone is safe and everyone is in a secure environment. But it's still educating some of the families to understand that it's okay if their daughter wants to do something, because culturally they've not done it before. Culturally, the women have always stayed at home, but that is something that as an expat and as a foreigner, we sort of look at and go, but why? But that's when you need to take that time to spend time with the families, to understand culturally, this is how things are, and culturally, this is how they have been, you know, brought up. And it's all about that respect again. And for me, you know, and I've used this picture a few times because it really symbolizes how far the Maldives has come in the last 12 years. You know, if we had looked at this, you know, in 2008, that panel would have been all men. There wouldn't have been any women on that panel. So when they put it together, they sort of said to me, would I be interested? And when I found out who the other panelist was, I was like, absolutely. Because it really shows how much, you know, and every single one of them are pioneers and trailblazers in their own right, because they've proven that women can do the job just as well as men. And to have a female Maldivian who is president of their chef's guild is huge, because everyone else within the guild are all men. And yet she's heading up, you know, she's heading up there. And the two other ladies with their resorts, they are well-known luxury brands in the Maldives, and they are the resort manager. So when the general manager is off island, they run the resort and they look after everything. So, you know, it's the reason looking at it is to get people to sort of take a step back and realize that unfortunately there are still countries, cultures whereby women have to fight for, you know, what you and I are in some ways used to seeing each and every day. Yes. And again, it gives you that ability when you step into these environments that you have that ability to become a sponge and absorb all of this information. And again, it teaches you that ability to take a step back, to look at the bigger picture, and to ask the question, well, why has that happened? What's the reason behind it? And without sort of jumping in, you know, head first and suddenly realizing, oh, you know, I've made the big mistake. And it's the same, you know, referring back to the ship environment and having that ability to be in HR is that sometimes we're very quick to make a judgment. Whereas, you know, when you look at these two different scenarios, it also teaches you to step back and also be the one that says to the GM, hang on a minute, are we making an assumption because we're attributing it to something different, or have we actually taken that extra 5 minutes to step back and go, is there a reason why this may or may not have happened from a cultural perspective? And a few years ago, the big sort of debate was, do, you know, ladies or women in the Maldives that work in reception, can they wear their headscarves? Now, for some of us, that should be a question, well, why not? It's the Maldives, it's their company, it's their culture, it's their country. Some resorts were, oh, it might put the guests off. So it's the 21st century, and we're still having those debates within the industry. But as I said, for me, I'm really proud of this picture, is because it represents, for those that understand the Maldives and where they've come in the last 12 years, it's such a significant picture, because they're strong women and they lead and are leading and still leading, you know, big international brands. But it's showing that whereas in the UK, we don't blink or we don't question, oh, you know, who's doing, whereas in a country like the Maldives, to see this, you really do realize that they're still struggling in some ways to make their presence known, and also to have that ability to be respected and trusted in these types of positions, whereas culturally the women inevitably would have been the ones at home looking after the families.
Thanks, Neil. Campbell's actually just put a comment again, making a judgment is a huge role in HR, which is definitely so true. And I think on the gender piece, I think we've been doing a lot about that in the MDP review as well. And I think quite shockingly, some of the results were sort of, I've just got them written here. So only 72 women, so from every 100 men promoted or hired to a managerial position, there were only 72 women promoted, and that's in the UK. So I think there's obviously so much more work to be done. But I think as you've said, it's sort of improving in the Maldives. I think that's so great to hear, because I think as you see more representation, then I think younger generations will see that they can do it, and that's really important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, you know, with, you know, taking the Maldives as a destination, and a lot of individuals that go there for a holiday will go to their resort and they won't necessarily question everything, because, you know, they're there on holiday, so why should they? So until you really take that opportunity to immerse yourself in it, whether you're working there, or there's a lot of companies now that do sort of sustainable, environmental, community-led tourism, and those sort of holidays will give you that experience to understand culturally what it means to have, you know, women leading a resort or leading a team, and it's yeah, I suppose it's a shame that we still have to go past that to move forward. And unfortunately, until those that sort of sit at the very top of any organization really do take that step back and the opportunity to look at what's going on around them, then sometimes you become so blinkered in the here and now that you actually don't realize what's going on around you. And, you know, I always have a lot of respect for those GMs, or, you know, the owners and clients that we work with, that actually, you know, they come to you and say, I want this to happen, and I need to sort of take that opportunity to look at the bigger picture, because it's very much, you know, I call it the ripple, you know, you put a pebble in the pond and the rings sort of start getting, and in some ways this picture has taken 12 years, but it's happened because these individuals wanted to get to this point. And they still need to, you know, there's still work going on with colleges and schools and families in the community, but it's a topic that can be discussed more openly, because these individuals actually have that ability to talk them through it, to say, you know what, it's a great industry and you can achieve it as well.
Great. I think as well on that, I think parenthood responsibilities are another big barrier in sort of the hospitality industry, because obviously you get to a certain point in your career as a woman and then you may want to go off and have children. So then that stunts your career. So I think I would be interested to hear, this is one from me actually, what you think are some of the ways sort of, I know that's a big challenge, but how do you think people could overcome that, the hospitality industry in specifically, how they could come to overcome that?
I do not. It's funny actually, because it was a very similar question that was actually raised to the panel. Was you have obviously women and they start a family, and how do you encourage them to come back? And some resorts, because geographically the Maldives is an island nation, so your resort is where you live and work. If you live nearby, great, you can commute by a boat every single day. So what some resorts were doing, and this isn't something that can happen with every single resort, because obviously, you know, some islands are big, some islands are small, but if the resort had a sort of I don't want to say date, like a children's activity area where you had that ability to have, you know, children, then some resorts would allow, if, you know, the females were of a senior position or they had their own accommodation, that someone could come and sort of look after the child, or as they got older they could use the facilities on site. So it was very much about providing that ability and the facility that a working mum can come back to work, and, you know, her child is ability can go into a creche or into a daycare. But it's still, I still think, unfortunately, it's that whole mindset change of, you know, so and so's coming back to work, oh, you know, what's going to happen type of thing. But whether or not, you know, organisations have that ability to say, well, we have an in-house creche or nursery, so why don't we incorporate that within the benefit package? And, you know, they can do so many days return to work, or, you know, job share or something of that nature. So I know some resorts, and depending on, and for some of the women, they've got young children, so they're of that age that they can go into a nursery or something of that, you know, nature. And the resorts do allow that, but it's still, there's still very much, you will find that, you know, when they go and have children, you may not see them back for 2 to 3 years. Culturally, a lot of crew members that live and work on a ship, you know, and this is where you really sort of have to respect and understand where they're coming from, is that a lot of women will go and have their child, and they will come back to sea almost immediately. Now, for some of us, that's like, oh, you know, why would you do that? For them, they're at sea to earn money to support their family and to put their children through education. And their family, their parents, you know, and their siblings are actually then looking after the children. So it becomes a very, and that's almost alien to us to think that someone would have a child and go straight back to work. Whereas for some cultures, that's how they ensure their children get through college and university, and their parents look after the child whilst they're away. And culturally, that's what they do. Whereas for us, you look at it and go, why would you do that? What, you know, it's so, but again, it's having that respect and understanding for the culture, and also why are they doing it? What's their aim? What's the goal for them as individuals?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I really like that whole piece on respecting everyone and actually taking the time to listen and understand exactly what they need, their requirements, and or just respecting their sort of differences as well. And I think that a lot of companies can learn from that, really. So I know we are slightly over time, so we'll just wrap up there. But thanks so much, Neil, for joining us. And I'm just letting everyone know who is watching, or if you're watching on demand, if you did have any more questions, please feel free to still send them in, and we will make sure they get answered. And if you are new, you can see everything that we do here at www.dialglobal.org, and all of this recording and all of these slides will go into the community. So yeah, as I said, any questions, please do just shout. But thank you again, Neil. It's been amazing. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And as Rebecca said, I'll answer all your questions for you.